Hello and welcome everyone to the EACA online webinar program. I'm Jim Worm, Executive Director of the EACA and your host for our webinar series. The EACA webinar series is offered to our members to assist you in developing new and better ways to build your business, to save money, and to experience the support of our community. I wanted to thank you all for carving out some valuable time to be with us for today's program, which is titled Why Salespeople Don't Sell. And we're pleased and proud to welcome back today's guest presenter, Dan Green of Nolan Advisory, who has previously presented webinar programs on programs such as cash flow management, scaling your business, and pricing strategies. Nolan Advisory Services is a management advisory firm focused on helping businesses in the exhibition and event marketing space solve the complex challenges and decisions facing their companies. Nolan Advisory Services consultants have helped many clients to build successful businesses and achieve performance goals through sound strategies and financial practices. Dan's webinar today is on why salespeople don't sell, a topic we know is vital to every one of our members, as sales is the engine that makes our businesses go. I know we're all looking forward to the insights that Dan will provide to supercharge your sales efforts. And if you have any questions or comments during the process, feel free to use the chat bar, but there will be a Q&A at the end of the program. So with that, let me turn the program over to Dan Green. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Jim, and hi, everybody, and thanks for having me back for discussions with the AC members. It's always a pleasure. I do apologize about the lighting in my office, but for right now, this is the best I can do. While my background has largely been in strategy, finance, and operations, early on I realized that sales is the most important aspect of any business, especially in the trade show and event space. When I was presented with the opportunity to speak about this topic, I thought it would be a topic on how the worlds of sales and marketing and finance might come together or something like that. But when Jim brought up the topic of why salespeople can't sell, I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to the dark side. This is probably a topic that we could continue speaking on for many days. I'll do my best to provide some meaningful content in the next 30 to 40 minutes. I will give a perspective both from management and from account executives. Now, I spent 25 years in the exhibition and event marketing space, witnessing every kind of strategy to build companies. And although my degrees and experience have been in finance and building strategy, I've always had a fascination with sales. And from a purely financial standpoint, sales is the most important aspect of executive leadership. And that's due to the fact that your offerings provide revenue generating opportunities for your customers. That's first and foremost in your sales approach. Also, the quality of revenues that you provide your company will give your company investment for future improvements, both in personnel and equipment. And without the efforts of your salespeople, nobody would have meaningful employment. And for the owners out there, if you're planning an exit strategy, sales are going to drive the value of your company. One last point before moving on. Successful salespeople have one of the very, very few jobs in our business, let alone any business, where they can earn more than an owner or president. And that in and of itself is a great motivator. Sales is the most important aspect of leadership in the creation of value for our companies. And as much as we'd like to think that our processes and operations drive profits, nothing happens until something sells. Here we polled exhibit companies on sales growth outlook for the next year. About 65% of companies in our industry are predicting growth, but not by an overly optimistic amount. We will see much of the momentum that we saw in 2008 slide into 2009, but we can see a number of the companies that thought they would maintain higher revenue levels last year are actually decreasing due to economic conditions. Now, looking at this graph, the number of companies predicting growth aggressively, and that's the over 20% category, it's been within a few percentage points of where it was last year. Most recently, about 13% of the companies forecasted a very aggressive level of growth at 20% or more. Now, EAC members have an opportunity to grow at least at the rates presented because of the role services, logistics, and technology is playing in the success of exhibition and event marketing. And as we continue in this particular economic cycle, we have to continually adapt to new methods of connecting and selling to our existing and prospective clients. Over the past 10 to 15 years, the sales process has changed. And there was a time when salespeople in our industry were the gatekeepers of product knowledge and industry knowledge. Now, usually when we make our first contact, the customer already knows the answers to the questions we used to ask, and that's thanks to the internet and social media. So it's time for sales to shift into a new mindset and take advantage and improve some of the sales conversations. There are so many reasons why salespeople can't sell, and it's almost hard to figure out where to start. I've worked with companies as small as $1 million in sales and companies that had over $1 billion in sales, and they're all trying to figure out the answer to that question. Now, the challenges that we face in sales are both individual and collective, meaning that there are issues with the individual salesperson and with the way the company operates. And don't take this personally, but all companies in our industry have their own level of dysfunction. Now, again, we'll touch on management's viewpoint as well as the salesperson's viewpoint, and we'll start with some of the personal or individual reasons salespeople can't sell, and then speak a little bit about how that fits into the company's overall strategy. Most people in the events industry don't have an idea of what they're selling. And regardless of where you are in the food chain, whether it's flooring, shipping, I&D, or AV, we are selling something invisible, which is a result. We're selling an increase in sales and branding opportunities from our clients' efforts in the trade show and event marketing. And that, for us, is a very, very big responsibility. And because the product that we sell is not tangible, many people don't know how to approach that sales process. Now, another reason I feel that salespeople can't sell is that usually there's a lack of accountability and anonymous failure. And don't forget that phrase, because you'll be thinking about it every time you provide a sales manager your forecast, or if you're a manager, you get a sales update from your team. Anonymous failure. Who's going to know what's real or not real in the sales pipeline? And what's more is who's going to know the real reason your company loses that prospect? Salespeople know this, and given their gift of making everything sound positive and favorable, some managers may never know why an opportunity is lost. Managers always try to be astute leaders of companies and guide, direct, and trust our employees and allow them to grow in our organizational structure. However, the most successful salespeople in our industry usually have egos to match. So what's to keep them from telling their managers something that may or may not be true, so that they can preserve their egos? And we've all heard reasons why we lost projects in the past. One common one is that, they decided to stay with their existing supplier. And although this may seem logical, your value proposition deserves more than this. Also, without constructive feedback, how are we going to make our companies better? And sometimes the real reason for losing the opportunity might be your services and products weren't a match for our program. You couldn't offer a specific piece of equipment. Salesperson was too pushy or arrogant, and that's a real excuse. Or maybe the salesperson just didn't ask me for the business. Now, here's a true story about accountability. When I was in an operations role at an exhibit and event company, We had a salesperson, and for this example, we'll call him Chuck, who always had that next big project. And after some time, he hadn't sold anything, but the sales manager didn't want to let him go just in case he landed one of those next big projects. And one particular project he was chasing was a big project, well over $1 million. It consisted of multiple events, graphics, audiovisual, interactive technology, and over a period of 9 months or so, the design and scope of the project kept changing. And the reason we didn't close the project always seemed to be the design department's fault. And with every change, we had new hope of landing the client. But after the end of 9 months, I decided to call the client and see what we could do to close the business. So I dialed the number, and the marketing representative picked up. I said, "Hi, my name is Dan Green from XYZ Company. We've been working on your project and have come up with some pretty creative solutions for your marketing initiatives. What's it going to take for us to win the opportunity?" And the contact said, "Why are you calling? We told Chuck 9 months ago we wouldn't work with him because he was pushy, arrogant, and unengaged." Now, that was a complete waste of time and a complete waste of money, all chasing a lie. And that company that I worked at, we incurred time and expense from the sales department, the design department, estimators, account manager, and more. Needless to say, that was the end of Chuck's career with us, but we used this negative experience to move forward with the rest of our sales team. So I would recommend every once in a while during the sales process or after losing a large opportunity, have somebody from outside the sales department call the client or prospect to ask what went wrong, and then share those experiences with your sales team, because a little honest feedback goes a long way. What can happen if we let this anonymous failure remain anonymous? It will turn what seems to be a hopeful and optimistic sales pipeline into a sewer line, wasting everybody's time and money. Now, an inexperienced and unrealistic sales executive is going to allow themselves to be caught up in the creation of the pipeline as a way to forecast sales regardless of their ability to sell. And many times they do it so it seems like they're working hard for the company. Now, sales forecasting is a notoriously difficult process, and inexperienced managers and AEs are going to have to learn the hard way that sales meetings, prospect interest, apparent momentum don't always translate into closed sales in anywhere near the time and speed one would hope. And missing a sales forecast hurts every company, no matter what size they are. So rather than viewing the process as a pipeline, view it more as a sales funnel. And as the qualifying process continues, fewer and fewer leads get through, allowing your organization to focus its resources on winning the business. So changing a company's mentality from creating a sales pipeline to managing a sales funnel is no easy process. But as Winston Churchill once said, there's nothing wrong with change as long as it's in the right direction. Now, after the success rate of a sales funnel increases and the sales team buys into that kind of a qualifying process, your company will see the forecasting process become a much more pleasant and rewarding experience. Now, leaders in the sales field must continually evaluate where an opportunity is relative to key sales milestones, and if sales reps are realistically categorizing some of these various opportunities. So in short, we have to move away from anonymous failure to be more successful. Salespeople need to start asking tougher questions, especially of new clients. And you don't have the business anyway, so you should utilize this opportunity to better qualify and manage your resources. You could ask questions like, if I make another revision and I'm in your budget, will we get the business? Before I start another proposal, what don't you like about your current provider? How many companies are involved in this RFP process? And You've been with your existing supplier for so many years. Why are you looking to change? Next, sales is the hardest part of any business, and it takes work to be successful. It takes work. Wannabes in the industry want to be successful in sales, but many don't have the skills or the stamina that it takes to be successful. A lot of people want the glory, but won't do the work. They want the income, but won't do the work. And I think their hope is that by presenting features and benefits of their products and services, that will be enough to transform their role from being a salesperson to an order taker. Now, owners want sales all the time and want to motivate their employees. And a lot of times you'll see in companies that when a good employee expresses interest in sales, most owners and executives go along with it because they figure, what can go wrong? We're providing a career path to a valued employee. They have experience in the industry, and we're picking up an additional salesperson. But it takes a hell of a lot of work to be successful in sales. One of my colleagues owns a small independent advertising agency, and I enjoy meeting with him because he always provides insight to unlocking the eternal mystery of what it takes to be successful in sales. And in researching for this presentation, I asked him, why can't anybody be successful in sales, especially in the right culture and support system? And his response was, Dan, it takes 7 touch points for a customer to even recognize a new company's name, let alone establish a company's brand. 7 touch points. And that's a lot of work just to get a client to know where you're calling from. And as a definition, you see it on the slide, a touch point describes the interface a customer or non-customer has with a product, service, company, or brand, either before, during, or after a transaction. Now, trying to question everything and wanting to put my friend's theory to the test, I began hunting down some statistics from some credible sales research. And the National Sales Executive Association provided these, which confirmed what this advertising expert had told me. 2% of sales are made on the first contact, 3% of sales are made on the second contact, 5% of sales are made on the third contact, 10% of sales are made on the fourth contact, and 80% of sales are made on the 5th to 12th contact. 5th to 12th contact. And I've said it before, it takes a lot of work to be successful in sales. And also 7 touch points definitely falls between 5 and 12 contacts. Now let's share the bad news from the National Sales Executive Association. It doesn't give a lot of credit to the individual salesperson or sales management on their efforts to make 7 touch points, but 48% of people do not follow up with a prospect. 25% of people make a second contact and stop. 12% of people only make 3 contacts and stop. And only 10% of salespeople make more than 3 contacts. And this is why so few salespeople reach the upper echelon and levels of earnings of their respective industries. It takes a lot of work. Now, another reason people can't sell is that they want to compete on price. And competing solely on price is always going to be a losing proposition. The economic crisis that is now in our rearview mirror created a focus on price by our clients, but that jeopardizes our financial viability. Cutting prices is going to cut into our profitability and future investment for our companies. Our clients using trade show and event marketing are always going to be focused somewhat on price, but if they are overly fixated on this aspect of competition, your loss is going to be their gain. So you have to seek a balance in attaining benefits for your client, your company, and the account team incentives. And many times, usually earlier in the bidding process, you will uncover a competitor who is willing, either out of inexperience or pure desperation, to continue lowering their costs. And this is at best a stopgap measure, but never a long-term strategy. And I apologize, I did have a slide here, but for some reason my format did not upload, so I'll do my best to talk through this. And this is about the evolution of selling over the past 20 years. And another reason salespeople can't sell is that things are much different now. In fact, there's a whole industry on sales training and how it continues to evolve and change. 20 years ago, we were able to sell the features and benefits of our product and service. And that's when our salespeople were the guardians of product knowledge. In the 2000s, there was a big push towards consultative selling, and this was the shift to personal selling, in which a salesperson played the role more of a consultant. He or she first assisted a customer in identifying his or her needs and then suggesting the products or services that satisfied those needs. Now we have to adapt to what we'll call insight selling, or what's next selling. Speed is the new barrier, and companies have to be optimized to compete. We have to be ready because our customers usually do research in the early awareness and consideration stage of the selling cycle. They usually know the answers to the questions our sales team used to ask, and have developed a whole list of questions that are going to challenge members of our sales team, especially the inexperienced ones. And sometimes salespeople can be intimidated by the shift in customer behavior and then try to avoid it. Now, how do you know when a salesperson is beginning to fall behind or not keeping up with his or her customers? The deals and projects tend to start getting smaller than in the past. It usually starts taking longer to close a sale than in the past. Salespeople can't get in to meet the decision makers as they have in the past. And what's happening here is that customers are making you irrelevant and opening the door for your competitors to come in. Now, another reason salespeople can't sell is that a lot of times they're afraid to sell against the big boys or the larger companies in our industry. And you know who they are, and they're all trying to sell into your current client base. And I don't see any need to be afraid. In fact, you should feel joy every time you beat these guys. The larger companies always beat up on independents, and they usually try to sell on the basis of, we're large and we're financially responsible. We've made the investment into products and equipments that you need, and we have the infrastructure and personnel to get the job done. Now, the problem is that these companies are big, and as I'm thinking about it, another example is the use of the word "we" in all those statements. They think they know what's best for the customer, but rarely is it in their sales pitches. It's more about them and their capabilities than it is about their customers. And you have to point that out in your presentations. Now, sometimes these larger companies are actually hampered by their size because making changes for the benefit of their customer is a very slow process. Making investment decisions for, say a specialized piece of AV equipment is usually a long process and has to go through capital expenditure committees for approval. And they have to answer questions like, how many times will the client rent this equipment in the next year? Or how much are you going to charge them for the rental? Is there a cheaper model for us to buy? And getting answers to even simple questions can take days. And these questions and the subsequent discussions can take weeks to answer, if not months. And in the meantime, the customer is left in limbo, trying to figure out their event marketing initiatives. Smaller companies, on the other hand, can be fast and nimble. Independent firms, like a lot of the EACs, can be innovative and take chances for the benefit of their customers. Their investment decisions can usually be made immediately. Smaller, leaner infrastructure allows for employees to be closer to the business and the customer, And being close to the customer is usually the greatest assurance that the business is going to stay with you. And from the financial side, this is the best way to ensure a lifetime of cash flows remain intact. Now let's move a little farther up the food chain to sales management and how this can impede success from your sales team. And before I start, let me just say that being a sales manager is tough. Every day you have to make hard decisions. Most of them are about closing deals with your reps and their customers. At other times, and these are the bad times, you have to decide whether or not to keep a sales rep. So if you do have a sales rep that isn't selling, start with a series of questions to turn on yourself as a sales manager. Is this problem in finding deals, or is it in closing the deals? Because one is a prospecting problem and the other is a harvesting problem, and each one of those has its own solution. Ask yourself whether you, as a sales manager, could harvest the pipeline and how. And most likely your answer will tell you what's wrong and what to do about it. You should ask yourself whether the salesperson has ever met their quota, and if yes, what's changed, and therein lies your solution. So one of the primary focuses of sales management is to keep your reps out of trouble, and that means watching the numbers and productivity, which takes a lot of talking and even more listening. But it is easier to stay ahead of the problem, and always remember the phrase from earlier in this conversation, anonymous failure. Building on the sales management aspect of why salespeople can't sell, is not all salespeople work the same way. How do you manage a group of independent thinkers with wildly different personalities, all motivated by something different? And some people have attempted to profile their salespeople into two main categories, farmers and hunters, or hunters and gatherers. And I don't like these phrases because to me it separates the importance of the functions, which are both critical to success. Also, it emphasizes prospecting over closing and then closing over prospecting. And the last reason I don't like these categories is that real farmers tend to be passive, and going for the close and asking a client to commit is going to take confidence and a good bit of ego. So farmer seems a little bit meek for somebody in this role. I don't know if I would categorize people as hunters and farmers as much as I would categorize the sales functions or phases as hunting and farming, and then a third category which we'll describe in a moment. Members of your sales team should exhibit all three of these characteristics, but is always going to be a little bit more dominant in one of these. Now, hunters or prospectors or business development professionals, these people are driven by the hunt for new customers. They tend to be self-motivated. There is very little focus on details, just getting a new client interested in working with your company. They come across as a little bit ADD, but they're very instinctive. They enjoy new challenges. This group is usually highly independent, but definitely needs to be watched. The gatherers or closers, which you see at the top of this slide, these people are driven by winning business. They're more strategically focused and tend to have great presentation skills. And they're very, very good at leading their account team. However, they may lack service skills or follow through, in my experience. Now, the third category, which you can see at the lower right, is the tribal leader or sales team leader, or a better use of the word farmer. And I can't take credit for this category. I went to a presentation by another sales and marketing executive in our industry where she first addressed this third category at an industry function. And this tribal leader, they are very, very good at growing existing accounts. And if you think about it, these existing accounts or house accounts have the highest possibility of sale and the quickest source of cash flow. They tend to be customer advocates, so they are the ones walking in asking for discounts usually. They're very, very skilled at selling both vertically and horizontally within the account because of their relationship with existing clients. They enjoy the account depth, product complexity, and some of the scheduling challenges in our business. And they are more driven by the project success and understanding the client's needs than new revenues or commissions. But these employees will not look for new business outside of their existing client base. Now, each phase or personality characteristic has to be managed on an individual basis. A weekly sales meeting with the entire sales group is not going to be effective, or it's not going to motivate individual members of any of these groups. So you have to manage both individually and as a group to improve the performance of your team. Now on this slide, my alignment was off. Example number 2 should be a couple of tabs to the right, but I'll do my best to talk through this. It's important for sales management to focus more on the lifetime cash flows instead of high gross margins on a per project basis. And in an industry such as ours, where quality and customer service is going to determine the future of our relationship, we have to focus on maximizing cash flows of the equipment we already have. Now, cash flows can be utilized for investment into higher generating equipment in the future, especially in the AV industry. So changing from a transaction-based sales mindset to a program-based sales mindset, even if you have to give slight discounts, may be necessary to maximize the cash flow per client. Now, if we look at example 1, below the bold, we see in this fictitious project that, say the equipment rental, you're charging $27,000, and yet the labor and equipment required to install it is $16,000. The cost is $16,000. On this fictional project, you're looking at a gross margin of about $11,000. Now, if you can convince that client to use you and say, you know, if you commit to us for X amount of shows or X amount of time, we could do a 10% discount on the equipment. And in this example, you see 10% off the original $27,000, so the equipment rental would be $24,000. Same cost for labor and equipment are $16,000. And even though that gross profit is less on this project per basis or per project basis, if you do that over 2 events, you're looking at a guaranteed $16,000 in cash flow and gross profits. And if you do 3, you're looking at $24,000. So instead of looking at project by project, you know, kind of look at the lifetime value that that customer could bring you. Now, moving from individual reasons why salespeople can't sell to sales management issues of why salespeople can't sell, let's talk a little bit about the biggest reason salespeople can't sell. We're moving from a small, manageable, and measurable issue to a large and more complex issue. And many companies foster an environment where it's difficult to sell, usually because there's a lack of a strategic framework. And this is the hardest to implement in small companies because they're so entrepreneurial and leadership has moved so fast in their pursuit of success. Now, any company, regardless of size and capabilities, should begin to develop a strategic framework to help build more sales in a financially healthy future. Now, developing a strategic framework for an EAC servicing the exhibition and event market should not be an overwhelming process. Implementing some kind of a strategy in your business is going to allow leaders to, 1, understand, 2, analyze, and 3, most importantly, execute or employ the activities that have been shown to generate higher sales and higher returns. And if you think about it, strategic management is about increasing sales and continuing to run the total business enterprise. That takes understanding all of the challenges and the environment in which the business operates. Now, what comes from increases in the company's revenue and value? You get pricing power. If you can reach your break-even points sooner in the year, that would give you a lot more leverage to discount and earn new business if those new customers are a little more price sensitive. Increases in sales are going to allow you to reinvest into productive assets that hopefully will generate higher sales and returns later on. And very important to the culture of your company, increases in sales improve the livelihood not only of owners but of employees and customers. Now, businesses are driven in the direction that they are steered, and I hope the discussion today is going to provide you at least one good idea to bring back to your companies to make you more profitable and increase your sales.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your presentation.
That is the end of my formal presentation.
If you have any questions, please go ahead and enter them in the chat bar. I see Scott Sokol offered his thanks. But Dan, I was just remembering our conversation the other day. One of the other little memory mnemonics I learned a long time ago about sales that I thought I might offer just as a conversation point is that traveling with my boss when I was first in this industry, I was sitting next to a guy that was a sales manager. We were talking about sales, and he said in his company that they use this equation that dollars generated for a salesperson is equal to ask. And ask was the acronym was activity, skills, and knowledge. And at the beginning of a person's career, obviously the main thing that they have control over is their activity level. How many times that they're reaching out to customers. And like you said, 80% of sales are generated on that 5th to 12th point of contact. And then as over time, as skills develop and your knowledge develop, that's another way to increase and enhance your value to yourself and your organization. That was something that I always remembered and sticks with me still today, and I was wondering if you thought that might have some application to what we're talking about here today.
Absolutely. I should have included it in the slides, and it's easy to remember.
Just thanking you for a great presentation as I did as well. Yep. And with that, Dan, I guess we'll bring it to a close.
Greatly appreciated.
Questions at this time. Everybody that was on line here, appreciate your time. And like I said before, we will be posting this recorded session to the internet. If any of your other people would like to see it later, it'll be there for them. So with that, thanks again for participating in the EACA online webinar program, Dan, and thank you for all our attendees for being there today. And have a great rest of your day and a good weekend. Right, bye-bye.
Okay.